Hi everyone, welcome to the IMIM seminar series. Today we are honored to have Professor Yan Bei to present her paper, A New Classical Model of World Financial Cycles. Professor Yan works on international macro and international finance. So her work has been published at many great journals, including Econometrica, American Economic Review, Journal of Political Economy, Review of Economic Studies, and Journal of Monetary Economics, Journal of International Economics. So today we will also have two discussants for Professor Bei's paper. There are Professor Vivian Yue from Emory University and Professor Xiang Fang from Hong Kong University. Professor Bai, now all the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for Xiang and Vivian to discuss this paper. So it's a joint work with Patrick Kehoe, Pierre Laura Lopez, and Fabrizio Perry. Give me a second, yes. So let me start with this motivating picture. Here, I'm plotting the sovereign spreads for 12 emerging markets. By sovereign spreads, we measured with the yields of each emerging market's dollar-denominated bonds and the yields on the US bonds. We take the difference of those two, and all those bonds have similar maturities. And you can see that first, most of the time, this is a positive. That means that the emerging market economies usually pay high spreads on their sovereign bonds. And there are large variances across those countries, but there are also some common trend. Like in 90s, it was high and then falls during 2000, early 2000, and then becomes high again around Great Recession. And after COVID or after the Brexit period, it becomes high again and become more dispersed. So the sovereign spreads is definitely a first order issue for emerging markets business cycles. And then one important question is, what are the drivers of those emerging market spreads? So there are two views, the standard view and the global cycle view. The standard views is those fluctuations in emerging market spreads are driven by emerging markets' own shocks. For example, if we think about Argentina, why it has these high spreads is because the economy is not good and the country is more likely to default. That's why lenders ask for a higher interest rate or higher spreads for lending to these countries. A second view, or the more recent view, is this global cycle view. Here is the main driver is the US shocks. The US shocks actually generates the fluctuations in both US and the emerging market spreads. So what we're going to do today is we're going to build a new classical model that consists of both views. And we're going to abstract from the popular frictions like segmented market, exogenous collateral constraints, or value-add risk constraints, or noise traders. So we're going to relatively more neoclassical, and then the fluctuations is more coming from the US households stochastic discount factor. I'll be more clear about that. And we're going to use a model and financial and real data of the US and the emerging markets to assess how much each views in driving the emerging market spreads. So let me tell you a little bit more about the global cycle view and the standard view. So in this global cycle view, the point is the US shocks drives US and the emerging market spreads. Okay? Most of the quantitative work in this literature focus on the Great Recession and its afterwards. Okay? So I'm plotting two lines over here. The right one is the average of emerging markets spreads. That's the average of the first picture I was showing you. And then the blue one is the US corporate spreads. We measured as the difference between BAA and AAA yields. And you see that the two data series are highly correlated. The correlation is about 75%. So the north drive south seems promising. And then the standard view, like more classical one, the standard views, most of sovereign default literature will take this view is the emerging market spreads are mainly driven by its own shocks. Okay? So the literature mainly focus on the 90s or early 2000s. And so if you look at this episode, you will see that the emerging market spreads and the US corporate bonds are barely correlated. So the South drive South seems promising. And then we can also bring another US assets, asset prices, which is the US stock. Okay? So here, the left-hand picture, I replace the corporate spread with the US price over dividend ratio. So that measures the fluctuation of US stock. Okay? And we do see that during the Great Recession, around 2009, there's a collapse in the US stock. So the price over dividend ratio falls. At the same time, emerging market spread increase. So in general, during this global cycle periods, okay, the two are highly negatively correlated. So again, that seems to be consistent with the global cycle view that the US shock may be the main driver for emerging market spreads. And then if we go back to, yes, Xiang.
Yeah, can I can I just clarify, when you say global cycle,
Yes.
You can include both global real cycle and global financial cycle, right? It doesn't have to be financial. It can be through the emerging market output.
It can be, yes. It could be the case that, but I more want to say is when we talk about global cycle, I more take the literature view. This is coming from the US. So it can be the case that it's a common shock in the emerging market that drives the fluctuations. Is that what no.
I'm more thinking about, for example, if US raise interest rate, then that could be bad for the emerging market fundamentals. But I guess what you want to say is more like the financing cost channel, right?
Yes. So I'm going to have, because in the data, you will see that the output correlation are very low across the US and emerging markets. So that could be the case, but that cannot be the main driver. That's why I'm more thinking about from the financial side. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
The model will match both real and financial side.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So if we look at the right-hand side picture, that's it. Again, that's in 90s or early 2000. The two things are not so correlated. Okay? The correlation between the US price dividend ratio and the emerging market spread is only about 7%. Okay? So in summary, I want to say that is, with this, there's this varying pattern of this co-movement of the US financial assets prices and the emerging market sovereign spreads. The existing models have some difficulty in explaining all those facts together. From the sovereign default literature, most of the time we focus on just one emerging market, and we not talk about this co-movement between North and South asset prices, or even the correlation of sovereign spreads within the emerging markets. And the quantitative global cycle literature focus a lot on this global cycle phase that is from Great Recession to the pre-COVID period. What we do is we develop a minimalist neoclassical model that can account for the emerging market sovereign spread, US stock, and the US corporate spreads. Okay? I call the neoclassical model because we want to abstract. The model does not have this popular frictions in the global bank side. The more I want to say is the more fluctuation is just because the household stochastic discount factors fluctuation. But then still, I want to say it's a minimalist because I need a model to be able to generate the fluctuation in the US stock and also US corporate spread. So we're going to put some frictions or some features to change the really neoclassical model so that we can generate those fluctuations. So by saying that, let me tell you the overview of the model. We're going to extend the state-of-the-art asset pricing model and the existing sovereign default models. We're going to have a North, which is a large country, and it has a production economy with the corporate defaults. So that can help us to generate the US spreads. We also have absence in preference and long-run risk on productivity. That allows us to generate the US price over dividend ratios over time. And we also have a bunch of small economies, and that's have sovereign default risks. Okay? Just to allow for, you see that in the data, those countries have the sovereign spreads varies across countries, but they also have some common trend. Okay, just allow the South shocks has a chance to generate all those. We allow for both common and idiosyncratic shocks. Okay? And we also have a common Northlanders. They're gonna price North stock, North corporate bonds, and also South sovereign bonds. So there are two key mechanisms that can generate this co-movements of all the asset prices. One is this common lender channel. When the North has bad times, it will make a North lenders less willing to hold the risky assets. And so that's why the North stock falls, because that's one of the risky assets. And you also see that the corporate spreads will go up and the emerging market spread will also go up. So in a way, this common lender channel help us to generate this co-movement between North stock firm spreads and also South spread, as we observed during this global cycle periods. And then these common shock channels, because southern countries are correlated, has correlated output growth, and so when South face a common bad shocks commonly in bad times, it makes all the southern countries more likely to default, and so South spreads rise at the same time, even when North spreads and stocks do not. So with this, this common shock channel also can contribute to what we see, this common fluctuations in the emerging market spreads. And then these two channels generates different co-movements in the US asset prices and emerging market spreads. So it's sort of in the data pattern, all this co-movement sort of provide some identification of what are the main driving forces. So in the data, in the quantitative part, we simultaneously account for emerging market spreads, output growth in the 12 emerging markets. And we also account for this firm spread, US stock, and output growth in the US. And then using the model, we can infer at each period of time, what's the contribution of each channel for this the world asset prices fluctuations. So we find that is the common lender channel plays a large role during the global cycle phase, but the common shock channel dominates during all other phases. But even during the global cycle phase, the common shock channel still play a significant part of, still contribute a significant part for the emerging market spreads. So our paper definitely links to the large sovereign default literature with investment risks. And what we have is we're gonna study the emerging market spread in bunches, and we have endogenous risk premium of lenders. And we also draw some features from long run risk literature. But the differences is we have a production economy with endogenous consumption and stock return and firm default and spreads. And then paper most related to the global cycle literature. Again, so the differences will be, we actually account for this US stock and corporate spread. And also our model, we don't really have this popular frictions of like collateral constraints on the banks, etc. It's more close to the neoclassical way. So if you don't have any question, I'm gonna move on to the model.
Sorry, so
Yep,
I think you the previous correlations of different phases are mainly focusing on the correlation between the South and the North, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think among the South countries, the spread correlation is much higher than the output correlation. So does this follow the same pattern? Say that in the global cycle phase, these correlations are higher, and in other times these are lower.
It's sort of that's the case too, because you remember the first picture. It is the case that in the 90s they are more dispersed, but during global cycle period, there's a larger co-movement. That is the case too. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But in the quantitative part, we're gonna generate all the patterns. Those all helps, like even within the emerging markets, that co-movements help us to identify the driving forces. Okay, so the model, we have a one North country and J small Southern countries. The North is a production economy with firm default risk. The South are pure exchange economies with sovereign default risks. And all the country has this absence in preference. Yes, okay. So that we assume that the South is impatient, and so they borrow from North. And the North lender is going to price all the asset prices in this world. Okay? And we assume that the South as a whole is a small in the world economy. Okay? And so in the end, we're going to really assuming that the North is like a closed economy. However, the North stochastic discount factor will be used to price the emerging market spread. Okay, so let me tell you what's the North. Given this absence in preference, we can write down what's the stochastic discount factor. So it not only depends on the marginal substitution between consumptions, it also depends on the relative value in the future values. Okay? So that's a standard. Okay? And then we can show what's the budget constraint of the household. They earn labor income, and they can also hold this deposit in the financial intermediaries, and they do the consumption. The important thing is the production side. So there's a continuum of firms, and they produce with labor and capital. All the firms face this common productivity shock, and the productivity shock is controlled by two components. First, it has this growth prospect. This XN alone is a persistent process. In the calibration, this rho is very persistent. So it's a slow-moving process. And also the productivity shock, the growth rate of the productivity shock also subject to this volatility shock. And the volatility shock alone also follows AR1 process. So this format is a standard shock setup from this long-run risk literature. The financial frictions, we take the elements from the literature. We assume that firms can issue long-term defaultable debt. So if they issue 1 unit of debt, they're going to promise in the future, tomorrow they pay 1 unit, and then the day after they pay 1 minus fee, and that's keep going on. So this 1 hour fee will capture the average maturity. Okay? And then to give firm incentive to borrow, we also assume that if they issue Q times B prime unit of bonds, okay, so Q will be the price of these bonds, they're going to receive the government subsidy of chi times of QB prime, and this, yes. Okay. So that basically gives firms the incentive to use bond, not use of equity to finance this investment. And then firms can choose to default. If they default, the existing shareholder will get 0, and the creditor will become owners of the firms, but they can only recover a theta fraction of the firm value. The 1 minus theta fraction of firm value will be rebated to the household. So there are no output being destroyed. It's just because of the creditors, they only get a theta fraction of the firm value. So that generates some wedges in the overall equation of the investment. So that's what is the individual firms problem. Firms, they're owned by household, and that's why they also use the stochastic discount factor of household to discount all the future values. They start with some capital K and debt. They also subject to some idiosyncratic revenue shock or kappa. First thing they do is they can choose whether or not to default. If default, existing shareholder will get 0. Otherwise, it will continue. Okay. So here we index, the index of T will record all the aggregate shocks and also the distribution firms potentially. The firm chooses to not default, it can continue to operate and choose labor and investment and also borrowing new debt to roll over the old debt. Okay. So the current dividend will be given by the output minus this revenue cost. So again, kappa is ID shock. And they pay the labor cost, conduct the investment, repay the debt, and they can also borrow new debt. If they issue new debt, the chi, remember that that's the government subsidy to the firm. And then because firm may default in the future, that's why the price will reflect the firm's the lender's losses during firm default. And it depends on the firm's capital stock for next period and also what is the new borrowings. It also depends on aggregate state. Because the kappa shock is an IED, and so we can write down a cutoff function for default. Firm gonna default if the kappa shock is large enough. If kappa is less than kappa star, then firm will not default, will continue to operating. So at kappa star, firm is indifferent. We can have the value of repaying is exactly equal to the defaulting. So the lenders, they are competitive and owned by North households. They're gonna lend to South and North countries, and they're gonna hold equity in the Northern firms. So that then the firm's bond price schedule gonna reflect this stochastic discount factor and also the expected default losses. So the upper line over here, this is the value if the firm repays what the lender expect to get. Okay? Expect to get 1 unit of repayment and plus the future value of the bonds, but then the bonds will decay with the fee. And kappa star, remember that captures the default cutoff. Anything with a kappa less than kappa star, firm will repay, and the phi is the repayment probability. The second line captures the value to the lender if the firm defaults. If that's the case, the lender will just creditor will just get a firm, but then it can only recover theta fraction of the firm value. And 1 minus theta will be rebated back to the household. Okay? And we can write down what's the firm value will be the value to the shareholder plus the value to the bondholder. That will be the total firm value when firm defaults. So that's the financial intermediaries problem. And we can talk about what is the aggregation in this economy. With a constraint into scale production function, all firms gonna choose the same leverage. And so firm distribution does not matter here. So we only need to record what's the common leverage and what is total aggregate capital stock. Okay? And the equilibrium, it's similar to what we usually see in the standard classical model is we're gonna have a closed economy model. We're gonna have output just equal to consumption plus the investment. Because we assume that all the emerging markets are small. In total, they don't affect the equilibrium of the North. But still, the aggregate state variable will enter each emerging markets problem, and that includes the North countries' leverage, firms' leverage, the capital, the long run risk, and also the volatility shock. But then we can solve the North stochastic discount factor independent from the South. But then we need all these 4 state variables to go into the emerging markets problem. Okay, so that's the North. Now let me tell you what's the South problem. In the South, we have a bunch of small paying economies, and they have an exogenous endowment process, and the outputs, the growth rate of the endowment also has this component of long run growth prospects. Okay. And we also assume that the shocks, the IED shock, and also this long run risk shock can be correlated across South. Okay. Then we can the debt and default in the South is similar to the US firm default. Each emerging market will also hold long-term debt. If not default, they're gonna pay off. The payoff sequence is similar, and this fee, $1 fee will capture this debt maturity. We're gonna have countries can default on its debt, but then they still have to repay 1 minus theta as of the repaying debt. Okay? So there's this partial recovery going on. The default will lead to temporary financial autarky and lower outputs. With probability of lambda, this defaulted country can come back to international financial markets. Okay. Following the literature, we also assume that there's an exogenous loss in output if the country in financial autarky. And this output loss, this part, depends on this long-run growth prospect of this country. So if the country has a really great growth in the future, there is a larger losses in the output during default. Okay. And another thing is during default, the country also received this stochastic income. So this is also like the IAD revenue shock in the firm side. This also help us to generate a smooth bond price schedule, easy to generate the default and spreads in this model. And then we can write down what's the South problem of the South. They have all the aggregates they have ever come from, sort of from the North, and they also have this own output and also long-run risk, because that's the persistent component. Okay. They first need to do is whether or not to, given their debt level and this IAD shock, they decide whether to repay or default. If they repay, they can still borrow new debt. If they default, they just go back to financial autarky and then consume the reduce the output. But if they default, they're probably lambda they come back with this partially recovered. So they still have to repay part of their debt. If they otherwise with 1 minus lambda, they stay in the financial autarky stage. Again, because the kappa shock is ID, there will be a default cutoff. At the default cutoff, the country is indifferent between default versus repaying. So that's the South problem. And then we can similarly write down what's the bond price schedule for each southern country.
Sorry, can I ask a question about the kappa?
kappa.
So here the kappa is not a technical assumption, right? It is not something that to induce stationarity.
It's not.
For convergence, yeah.
It helps over the convergence, but it also affects quantitative result. For example, suppose I have a kappa very volatile, very volatile, a loss of default is driven by that. You will see the spread and output are less correlated. So in a way, it helps us, or it can be disciplined by this correlation between spread and output growth. So it's not really a free, yes.
Okay, so it's not like a very small number.
It's not hard for me to say small or large though, but yes.
For example, in the typical models like Chetty's model or like in the Mihalashe, the model, they introduce some idiosyncratic shock that typically have very small variance just to make sure the Q function can converge, right?
Can converge, yes. I think also another popular way to do it now is the extreme value shocks. Lots of people put this extreme value shock. And in some workers saying that doesn't matter. However, it always matters for your equilibrium results. So I would prefer to say I'm going to calibrate that.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So that's right now is a part of the calibration. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Yang. Okay. So for the bond price schedule of the South, it's similar to the North. First, lenders will use the North household stochastic discount factor to price this bond. So that's a way to generate, one reason to generate the co-movement of spreads between North and the South, and also within the Southern countries. Okay. So the first line, that's if emerging markets repays, so that's the repaying probability. The second line is if this emerging market defaults, then X will capture the expected debt recovery, because that's the value of remaining debt. With probability lambda, this defaulted country will come back and it will repay theta fraction of the debt, which the price. This is the price of that amount of debt. And 1 minus lambda, the country is still in the autarky, but then in the future it may still come back, and that's why it has this value of xt plus 1 is here. So that's all the North and then the South problem. In the next, I will show quantitative results. So first thing I'm going to do is to choose parameters to characterize, to calibrate the model. And we're going to use the data of 12 emerging markets from 1994 and to 2019, all the quarterly data. And this is the list of the emerging markets. We assume that in the model, all the emerging markets have the same parameters, but just different in terms of shock realizations. Okay? We'll see how much of this can generate this fluctuation in the each country's spreads. The way we solve the model is we use the global solution method, and the parameters, some are assigned and some we endogenously choose to jointly match the key moments. So let me show you what moments we use to discipline the model. Okay? The first set is the output growth. So we target this distribution of the north and south output growth. So we trying to match the standard deviation, zero correlation, and also the correlation of output growth between north and south, and also across south. Because the data we have finite sample, there's 108 quarters, and with the long run risk, this 108 quarters is really hard to. It's short, I want to say. And so in the model, we did exactly same way. Is we simulate 108 quarters, but we did many of these simulations, and that's why in the model we're going to have a range for each moment. So this bracket we're going to report what is a 9 percentile to 95. This is 9 to 95 percentile range. Okay? First thing I want to emphasize is this correlation between output growth and north and south. Xiang actually was mentioning that at the beginning. So I want to show you again that this is actually small. Between north and south is only about 4%. In the model, we assume that the long run growth prospect in the north and south are not correlated. So north and south has no correlated shocks, and that's why the output growth is 0. But because of short sample reason, you do see that the model generates a range of correlations. Another thing is, even within south, the correlation of output growth is not large. It's only about 13%. So the model generates something similar, around 17%. Okay? And then the second set of moments is the emerging markets default and spreads. We match sort of the average default rate and average spread. So the data spread is higher than default, similar thing in the model. And part of the reason we can generate this is because of the long-term debt, and then the spread will capture all the future default risks. And that's why the spread is higher than the one period had a default rate. And we can also generate this high standard deviation spreads as in the data. We can also see the correlations of spreads across South countries. So remember that in the data, output growth of southern countries is only about 13%, but spreads are much more correlated. And our model can generate observe a higher correlation spreads than output. And the north and south spreads is also higher. That correlation is also higher than the output growth. Our model can also generate that. And remember that because underlying shocks are not correlated, the way we can generate this correlation is solely from these endogenous responses of the southern lenders, and also they have the common. This is all the common lender effect. Okay, and then in the model we can also generate this negative correlation between emerging market spread and the real interest rate. And the real interest rate or the risk-free rate in the data we measured as this the TBO rate, but it used a similar maturity as the emerging market spread. So the data is negative, meaning that when interest rate is low, emerging market spread is high. So part of the reason is because justification can be when the real interest rate is low, that's a good chance for, it's very good for emerging markets to borrow. They borrow more, the spread is higher. Okay? Of course, both things are endogenous in the model. Real interest rate and sovereign spread are both endogenous in the model. And then the other set of moments is the north, the US. Okay? So we can also match the standard deviation of the real interest rate and the difference between the spread and also the default rates. Okay? So we also match the stock market fluctuations. We generate similar volatility dividend growth of the US. Zero correlation price dividend ratio or the equity premium. Okay? So the model can match these large sets of moments of the output growth, emerging market spread, US spread, and the US stock market. Okay. So using the model, I think that provides some confidence for us to use the model to decompose the shocks, what drives the emerging market spreads in the data. Okay. So in the next, I'm going to show you briefly some impulse responses. So for us to understand what the mechanism of how each shock works. And then that develop some intuitions for how we're going to decompose the shocks in the data. And then we're going to use the particle filter to back out the underlying shocks that drive the world financial cycle. Okay. So first set of impulse response is, let's consider just the South, the long run risk of shock in the South, in emerging markets. So this will not affect the North at all. That's why I'm only showing you all the Southern variables. This bad long run growth prospect will generate a decline in the up growth, and is actually persistently low for a long period of time. Given the South has bad time and more likely to default in the future, that's why there's an increase in the South spread. In response to this bad shock, the Southern country also cut its debt. That's why we see a reduction in debt to GDP ratio. But this is actually a not big decline. Anyway, so but this decline generates in the future. There is the emerging market spread going back to the sort of the long run steady state. Okay, so that's standard in the sovereign spread literature. What about the North shock? So first shock I want to show you is the North volatility shock. So this increase in the volatility will make the northern lenders more, they feel like the risk will go up. They're less willing to hold risky assets. They want to save more. And that's why the North risk-free rate falls. And because the stock is quite volatile, and that's why they don't want to hold North stock, there's a decline in the price-dividend ratio. And there's also an increase in spread in the North. We can also decompose this increase in spread in terms of how much is because of the firms more likely to default in facing this more volatile state versus how much of the lender charge a higher premium. You can see that in this case, a lot is because of risk of premium, less so because of default risk. For emerging markets, this increase in the volatility shock also generates an increase in the South spread. Part of the reason is because this is also a risky asset for the northern household. That's why they charge a higher risk of premium, and this actually generates a default risk as well. This can be seen from the schedule the emerging markets facing. So here we're plotting like the schedule, meaning that for any level of debt, arbitrary level of debt, how much, if the emerging markets ask for this level of debt, how much of the spread the North lender will charge. Okay? And you can see there is on impact, and also even 8 years later after this increase in the volatility shock, the spread is still high. The spread schedule is still high. That's the reason generates this increase in the emerging market spreads. Of course, this fall in the risk-free rate will also generate a good opportunity to borrow, and that go up a little bit, but that's very small. Okay. So if you want to see how much there's a fall in the North PD and there's an increase in North spread, just to see the relative ratio is about 18. Okay. And this actually helps us to identify the volatility shock. Lastly is this XN shock. If we reduce the long run risk in the North, that would generate North output fall. And they don't want to hold risky asset again. That would generate a reduction in the risk-free rate, reduction in price of dividend ratio. The North spread will also go up partly because of the increase in default risk, partly because of this increase in the risk of premium. Okay. And this fall in XN will also generate a tightening up in the emerging market spread schedule, and that push up the emerging market spread as well. Okay, so the next I'm going to decompose the driving force of emerging market spread. But then I just want to remind you again, what are the features of Southern spread look like in the data, okay? In the early period in 1990s, that's what we call the EM crisis, is high and is very dispersed among those countries. And then after 2002, there's a dramatic decline in the spreads. Okay? That's what we call the great spread moderation. And also almost all the countries experience of this reduction in the sovereign spreads. And then just around the great financial crisis period, the sovereign spread go up again. And this is also the episode that feels like they move all together with each other. That's what we call the global cycle period. In the last period, we call the geoeconomic fragmentation, and we borrowed the term from IMF, and we classified the period of after Brexit. And you see that now the sovereign spread seems like going up again and become more dispersed. Okay? So all those phases, we're going to use the shock to explain it. So we use our model and we back out what shocks can generate this one. And so these features definitely will help us to, identify what's the shocks. Okay, so to decompose the spread, we use this particle filter. And we're going to use the decision rules to extract the most likely shocks underlying the observations. Again, we consider US and 12 emerging markets. So there are 27 observables. Each country, we're going to have, each emerging markets will have upward growth and spread. For the US, we have upward growth, price dividend, and spread. Okay, so there are 27 observables and 27 shocks. So this is how we match the series. We reported here, the right one is the average emerging market spreads. But underlying this, you should think about that is, I have this data, I have this spread series for each emerging markets. So we just simply average over here, but we actually we can show you for each pictures. Okay. And then this is the corporate spread, this is the US price dividend ratio. Okay. The model produces data well. It feels like should be easy to do it. But the thing is, if you need some very unlikely shock to produce the data, the filter actually gonna blame the movements on measurement errors. In this case, you're gonna see a large gap between model and data lines. Okay? That's why sometimes you will see that the solid line here is the data, dashed line is the model, they don't really exactly match. Okay? So we think that given that we have 12 emerging markets and also have US, this is actually a success to be able to match all the countries' emerging market spreads and output growth. Now I can tell you what's the shocks inferred by the filter. Okay? So I have 3 lines over here. The blue line is the long-run growth prospect of the North country. Red one is the average of emerging markets long-run growth prospect, and the green one is the volatility shock. So during the emerging markets crisis period, the US has a stock boom over this time. That's why XN go up. And because of emerging markets has a really high spread in this episode, that's why the average of X in the southern countries is actually low relative to the future. There is also an increase in volatility in this episode. Okay? And then during the great spread moderation, all the countries' sovereign spread falls. But at the same time, the US stock is not so good. That's why you see the XN, the blue line actually falls, and the XX increases. So that's a good time for emerging markets. That's why they have a decline in the spread. And then the global cycle phase, we see, especially during the GFC period, everything goes badly, right? XN is not good, XX is not good, and there's an increase in volatility shock. Okay. And then we have around the last episode, the geoeconomic fragmentation period. The emerging markets long-run growth prospect falls again. But then for the US, this is actually a good time. The stock market booms. That's why that generates that. Okay. So then we're using the model, we can decompose the emerging market spreads. We can see what's the role of North and South shocks. So what we do is, the black one is the baseline, which is also the data. Here is, we consider only the North shock, only XN and sigma N. Okay? And you see that with only North shock, we will not be able to generate this high volatile spread during the emerging market crisis period. And the spread will be pretty flat during the great spread moderation period. It can definitely help us to generate a lot of this high spread during global cycle period. But then once we go to this COVID episode, it's not helpful again. Okay. And then we can also look at a case of this red line, which has only the South. With only the South, it matched pretty well in the early episodes, but overshoots around 2000. So with only South shock, you would say the spread will be much higher than what we observed. The reason is because U.S. stock is a boom in this episode, and so that's why to generate this spread, we needed the Southern shock being really bad, really bad. Exactly. That's why it generates the overshooting. Okay, so we can summarize what's the variance. We can do a variance decomposition to see the contribution of North versus South shocks to the average of emerging market spread. Okay. Overall, it's about more than 80% is just because of the common Southern shocks. Okay. It's only during the global cycle period the North play a bigger role, about 68. But even during this period, the South still play like a significant role in the emerging market spreads, about 32%. I can also talk about what is for each country. The bottom line is similar. It's only during the global cycle period we see the Northern shock play a larger role. Otherwise, it's all the Southern shocks. We can, using the model, we can decompose to see how much is because we see the spread is because of the country's spread, its own default risk. How much is the risk premium? Okay. So to do that, we can see for North and South. Okay. So the left-hand side picture I'm plotting here is the blue is the South spreads, which is also the data. And and the green line is the default risk. Okay. And the difference between the spread and default risk is the risk premium. And you see that for South, its default risk is most of the spread. The right-hand side is the corporate spread in the North. Okay. Now, feels like there's a larger gap between spread and default risk. So the risk premium for corporate spread is most of the spread. Okay. I can also plot the risk premium together for North and South. Take the difference of the first picture and difference of the second picture, put them together. Okay. Now the right line is the South risk premium and the blue is the North risk premium. So the level actually are similar. But then if you think about the co-movement, okay, during emerging market crisis period, the correlation of South and North premium is low. But then during this global cycle period, their correlation is high. Okay, so I think I have 2 minutes. Let me tell you one more thing about, I tell you one extension. Okay? So in the baseline model, we use the, people call it investor grade bonds as a US corporate bond, okay? Or we measure with the difference between BAA and AAA. The reason we do it is because the model has a homogeneous, almost like firms are exposed as identical. Okay, and then there are 75. These BAA firms account for more than 75% of U.S. firms. That's why we use those types of spread. However, there are other types of firms. They issue junk bonds. Okay? For them, they are much more correlated with the emerging market spreads. So it's about 40% their correlation with the emerging market spread. So there are two questions. First is, can we extend the model to account for both spreads? And second is, does this higher correlation of junk bond spread imply that the North shock actually can play a higher, can explain a higher fraction of South spreads? So the answer for the first question is yes, we can do it. The second question is no. Even if you do it, we will now see the North shocks play a much larger role. So in this extension, we can include this junk bond firm in addition to our investment grade firms. Okay? The way we do it is we're going to assume that the junk bond firms do not affect the general equilibrium of the North, but we're going to choose their kappa shock, their idiosyncratic revenue shock parameter to match their default rate, their spread, and also the standard difference spread. So it is the case that those firms has a higher default rate, higher spread, and a much more volatile spreads. Okay. So this is the picture. I guess we can focus on the right-hand side picture. We have the right one is the emerging market spreads. The blue one is the North junk bond spreads. And each one has a solid line, dashed line. The solid is the data, and the dash is the model. So we can match all those. Okay. And it's true that if you remember if you look at the North investment grade spread at left-hand side, you see that is the junk bond spread are more correlated with the emerging market spread during around 2000. And it also has a higher level increase in spread during the GFC period. Okay. I think due to the time, I'm just tell you the result directly. So the variance decomposition, the first two are benchmark, the last two is the extension with junk bond. It's the case that the results is barely changed. Okay. It definitely has that is with the junk bond, we have during global cycle period, North play a larger role, go from increases from 68% to 73%. During EM crisis period, it also play a larger role because junk bond is more correlated with the emerging market spread. But the results is barely changed. It's all similar. So our conclusion is still there. Okay, so let me conclude. We have this neoclassical model that can explain these changing patterns of world financial cycles without resorting to popular frictions. A model is successful. We want to argue that a successful model must be able to generate the phases in which the North drives both North and South, the common lender channel, and also this common shock channel. The main finding is, I think the key takeaway is the neoclassical model can account for both real and financial cycles surprisingly well. Surprisingly well. That's it. That's for all the talk. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks to Professor Bai's great presentation. It's a very interesting paper with a very convincing evidence and a model. So now let's switch to the discussion session. But before we go to the discussion part, please give me 1 minute to make some advertisement and announcement when people are still here. So we are going to have a quite crowded schedule in the next month. So we will have 3 regular seminar and we will also have 7 rising star presentations in the next month. So we will on November 29th, so we will have Wenxin Du from Harvard, Annie Li from Johns Hopkins, and on December 20th, we will have Charles Engel. So those are the 3 regular seminar series. And we are again organizing the Rising Star seminar series in the mid-December. So these seminar series are the speakers are people on the job market. So they will present their job market papers. We will have 3 job Rising Star sessions, which we consider these papers are really good. So on December 13th, we will have Dongchen Zhao from University of Pennsylvania, and Yasisen Selvakumar from New York University, and Wentong Chen from Cornell. And on December 14th, US time, we will have George Nicola Kudos from Princeton, Blendo Candia from UC Berkeley. And on December 15th, we will have Ningxuan Wu from Harvard University and Federico Maninati from Chicago both. So we will have these 7 Rising Star presentations in the mid-December. We are looking forward to meeting you if you are interested in this paper. So now my advertisement is finished. So Xiang, would you like to share your screen?
First of all, thanks a lot for inviting me to discuss this very super interesting paper. As Ye mentioned, I've seen this paper before, but every time I read this paper, I learn something new. So it's actually, a very, very rich paper. I would say it's an amazingly fantastic paper with a state-of-the-art quantitative model of asset pricing in the North. and the business cycle and sovereign default model in the South. And they estimate the model using particle filter to infer the underlying shock in different episodes. And this is, with such a rich model and such a nonlinear feature of the model, it's technically very, very challenging. So although Yen presented it in the way that it sounds like you click the button and then you get everything, but actually there's a huge amount of work behind it. And I think it's also a perfect example of why the model is useful, why the model can be helpful for us to understand the data better. And the model quantifies the role of the global and local factors in driving the sovereign spread, which is kind of like a classic topic in this literature. And the key insight here is like the correlation between the global asset price between the global asset price and the emerging market spread is a very, very informative indicator of whether global or local shocks drive emerging market spread. So these are all the things that I really like about the paper. So in my discussion, I will mainly just talk about one thing, make one comment, that is maybe the authors can clarify a little bit on the source of the world financial cycle. That is, how exactly does the lender matter for the sovereign spread? So if I understand correctly, from a borrower's perspective, from EM borrower's perspective, what matters on the lender side is just the interest rate, right? It's the risk-free rate plus the risk premium. So that is what they care about. Like whether it's Epstein-Zing, long-run risk, these are they don't care. Okay, they just care about the price. So, one thing I feel surprised is like the risk-free rate and the spread are negatively correlated. So, if this is true, say when risk-free rate is low, then the emerging market borrows more, so the default risk is higher. Then should the same thing apply to risk premium? Because in that sense, the risk premium and the risk-free rate plays the same role. Then, if that's the case, what makes the world financial cycle? So my conjecture is probably one possibility is there is a negative correlation between risk-free rate and the risk premium if it's driven by the volatility shocks. So when volatility is high, risk-free rate is low, but risk premium is high. So if you sum them up, probably it's still higher it's still higher financing costs for the emerging market. So this is just my conjecture. I'm not sure whether it's true or not in the model. So it might be helpful to clarify on how it works. And another thing that is also from my experience about my recent work to understand the role of interest rate on sovereign spread. And it seems like in the standard model, the interest rate or the lender side doesn't move the spread so much. I think several papers have raised this issue. So this is just a simple, very plain vanilla long-term debt sovereign default model. So the only difference here from Yen's paper is, first of all, here I have a risk neutral investor, and also here I assume that if the borrower defaults, then the lender don't get anything. But in Yen's paper, there is some recovery value. So in this type of models, I think the interest rate effect is super, super small. I think the reason is because the interest rate effect changed the debt burden a little bit, only a very little bit, and there is an endogenous choice of the debt. This margin would even mitigate this effect. So my conjecture why the common lender matters so much in Yen's paper is because of this recovery upon default. Because in Yen's model, after the borrower defaults, actually the lender doesn't get nothing. They can recover some of the debt, and the debt is evaluated at the market price, and that market price is very much related to the risk-free rate as well as the risk premium. So that kind of introduces this co-movement of the common lender side and this spread. So I'm not sure whether my understanding is correct. So probably you can give us more kind of explanation on that. And relatedly, here you assume a constant recovery. So I guess this is different from the renegotiation literature, like Vivian's paper. They have a Nash bargaining, right? And I think Tim Kehoe and co-authors have a recent paper that argues it is necessary to have some renegotiation to make U.S. interest rate matter. quantitatively for the emerging market spread. So on that side, I would also be curious how much does the renegotiation matter, or even if maybe we just need a constant recovery rate. So and also a minor comment is probably it would be helpful to study the role of the risk-free rate and the risk premia separately, just to give us a better sense of, is it just the world interest rate or the risk premium that drives everything? Because we seem to have some empirical evidence that the two principal components of the spreads are related to the world interest rate and the risk premium. So they seem to play different roles. So that's all for my comments. Thank you very much.
Professor Bai, do you want to take a minute to respond to Xiang's comment?
Okay, so I think it's a wonderful discussion point. I really like Xiang's point that we should look more of risk-free rate and the risk premium. I do want to emphasize that this correlation of spread and risk-free rate is negative, but it's not so big either. I think a lot is still the risk premium. I haven't checked what's the correlation of risk-free rate and risk premium. That we can check about it. My understanding is a lot is the risk premium. It's true that the risk-free rate, I think in the literature, has no consensus of how that affects the sovereign spread. It depends on your model, and even in the data, nobody really identified the direction. I think that's something very interesting. But I still feel like it's not the risk-free rate in the model; it's the risk premium. But I like that. We should report more of the statistic related to what you said. In terms of recovery, I also don't think it's the recovery. The reason we add recovery is more because of people say you have with the north and south is unsymmetric, because the corporate spread part they have everybody has the recovery, and the north south, the emerging market, we should also have. We have a version of without shutting down recovery, the results is still there. I think a part of the reason maybe is the default rate per se is low. It's only about annually 2%. So quarterly is only like about 0.5%. So that's, and also there's a long recovery. I forgot how much, I think we did 2 years. And so that's also mitigate this effect. But we should report what happens if we don't have any data recovery. We can see what's the result over there. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know how to stop sharing, so maybe Vivian, you can just start sharing.
Work?
Yeah, it works. It works.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss this paper. Very interesting paper. I saw the early presentation before, but I'm glad to have a chance to read the paper. As Xiang was commenting, it is a super nice paper. It is a very ambitious undertaking to examine the changing patterns of world financial cycles. The empirical results are very interesting. So it really goes beyond what people have known about global financial cycles. And beyond the new empirical findings, this paper look at how emerging markets got impacted by what happened in developed countries through this very a new classical model framework that incorporates various drivers of asset prices. So using this comprehensive framework, the Yan and co-authors can answer the question, really, what are the responsible for the 4 distinct phases of world financial cycles, and how much do these common shocks drive what we know about the core movements of the emerging market spreads, as well as the asset price movements between the north and south. So Yan's presentation is very clear. So they incorporate these two common mechanisms. One is how the north and long run risk shock and volatility shock can affect the spreads through this changing the price of risk with a time varying stochastic discount factor. The other one is, the South has a common long run risk shock of their own. And then the quantity of risk in terms of default in their sovereign bonds will be varying as well. So they show that this model is able to replicate the variant movements of asset prices, and most of the 3 out of the 4 phases they identify, it's mainly the southern common shocks, explain why we see emerging market spreads fluctuate the way they are, except for the global cycle phases. So this is a major contribution to the literature, and I think it also provides important policy insights in terms of how we think about the financial stability across various phases of the world financial cycles. So I'm really glad that actually Yang already Xiang talk about this. Actually, I have this lingering question as well about the role of the risk-free rate. So I'm glad that again we had some discussion, because also in terms of how they pick the long run risk, the absenzing preference and the long run risk framework. So one thing I think you want to show is the dynamics of risk-free rate and correlation with the risk premium. So what I put down are actually the 2 comments. One is a little bit more in details. One is a broader question. The first is in terms of the model assume the southern shocks are independent of the northern shocks. So really all the impact of what happens in the developed countries are coming from this lending channel. But there are many reasons why emerging economies will depend on what happened to the developed countries through the production and trade links. So then it affect how we interpret the results. And also reading the paper, I find that you're very clear how you talk about the calibration. You said that you calibrate the model up to 2019, the last quarter. But then when we look at the asset prices movements, it's all up to the last quarter of 2023. So really, so I find this treatment of the Great Recession and the COVID periods it's a little bit puzzling. So here you have, especially in terms of how you can generate the high spread during the COVID periods. In the Great Recession, my understanding is you put in there's a world disaster, so it generates a one world disaster over the 20 years. That actually is, you can think about this, a common shock drives already both the south and north, but it's not very clear to me in terms of what is responsible to the COVID periods, because we didn't see much of a drop in the long run shock to the north, and a little bit increase in the volatility, but not a lot. So I think some more clarification, and think about the other very important dependence in terms of income from the emerging economies on the developed countries would be helpful. The other thing is again thinking about, it's a little bit like what Xiang talked about in his discussion. What, in terms of the emerging economies, what they need in terms of the model framework is a stochastic discount factor coming from the north. But what happens in the south is really doesn't impact the north at all. So this Yan and Nicole says they use this long run risk model to provide this model that study the asset pricing. But we also know there, in terms of asset pricing models, the disaster risk and intermediary asset pricing, all just some kind of exogenous specified stochastic discount factor. So I understand, I think Yan is very clear in their paper, they take this new classical model to see how far we can go without any other financial frictions. But I think maybe it will be helpful to provide some validation to say, okay, using this long run risk model, okay, so we have a clear identification mechanism coming out of the the bond spreads from the 12 emerging economies, as well as the stock and the corporate spreads for the U.S. and the PD ratio for the U.S. And then provide some validation in terms of the inferred shocks in order to match these asset prices and compare with what we typically look at, the measure of volatilities, and some empirical estimation that can infer the long persistent components. The other thing is then you can think about if it's not this new classical model, it is other models with maybe intermediary asset pricing, time varying constraint from intermediaries, or some response of or change in the U.S. monetary policy, etc. I think and then the question is whether what we see in terms of the different phases is indeed because of different realization of the shocks, or it's just the channels are different channels and the constraints are binding, time varying. I think I think you have done a lot in this paper, but it really can make me to think about maybe make the conclusion in terms of these are it's these kind of shocks drive the global cycles, world financial cycles, and provide more evidence for that. So overall, I really like the paper. It's very provides this super interesting empirical findings, and it provides a useful framework for us to understand the world financial cycles. I think that it has done a lot in terms of explaining the co-movements of asset prices over such for a large sample of countries over more than 20 years of data, and I look forward to see more work that follow after their study, and I think this is a really exciting area to go into. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. Can I respond?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think this is an awesome discussion. Yes. So just respond to Vivian's point. The first thing is allowing for North and South to be correlated. So in the past, they are correlated, but then the output growth correlation between North and South is really small, and so that's why we shut it down, this correlation, and then it's all coming from the endogenous mechanism instead of exogenous. We could allow for that, that's what I said, but then the North and South output correlation is only like 4%, so that wouldn't add much of it. And then I want to go to the last question first. So why to compare with like alternative mechanisms, say for example the global bank paper by Diego Price and Antonello, and also Morales' paper. So what they have is they have all coming from this restriction constraint of the global banks, and the way they do it is they match the stock returns of those bank sector stock returns. So we did a similar exercise saying, using our model and match their stock returns, the result doesn't change. I guess one puzzling thing in their works, if you look at the stock returns of banking sectors and also the S&P 500 stock returns, they highly commute with each other. So if we could have a model, I'm not saying, I say that's an alternative model. I like that paper a lot too. You can use that model, but then how can we generate that the U.S. general stock market return has also had some co-movement with the emerging market spreads? That I think is something missing in the literature. That's the reason motivated us to have this more called neoclassical model of starting from the household side, so we can generate the general U.S. stock returns. Yeah. But I like a lot of the comments. Yeah, you ask about the comparison. The COVID period, the challenge is the outgrowth has such a great decline, almost like a 50 to 60% of declining outgrowth. And so that's really hard to, without calibration involved, that is hard. and that's the reason we cut it.
Yeah. So but my question is then how do you get the spread?
Oh, the
So
reason we
like
get spread is
yes.
in when we do it, we assume that they're subject to the same disaster shock in the Great Recession case.
So there is also the same
There is
disaster.
and then
Yeah,
the
because
spread,
you said
you're
it's
right.
only one crisis
Oh
in the
yeah.
you said one crisis. Yeah.
And you're
But
right.
that's a bad luck. Just twice
There's a
happened.
one-time really bad luck, and actually most of the time the spread, emerging market spread, is driven by this long run risk. In
Right.
that episode, is actually driven by the idiosyncratic, the short run shock, because it's really bad, and then
Yeah.
they have a spike in the spread. Yes.
Okay. Now it
Was
makes
the
sense.
reason we did not include it. Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Vivian.
I have a quite a shallow question, so I'm not familiar with the literature. So I think the paper contributes to the world financial cycle literature. It also has some features of the paper with those from the Colacito's Journal of Finance paper. So I remember that the Colacito's paper is about exchange rate puzzles. So does your model shed some light on exchange rate or something like that?
Oh, we don't. We have only one good model, so we can't talk about exchange rate in this model. But in the future work,
That could be
but if
something.
somebody can do it, I think that's somebody can have like a multiple goods model and have a exchange rate that we abstract from it. All the output growth I'm talking about is in terms of dollars, so we making it one unit. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so are there any other questions? Okay, I think the discussants already did a really good job. So many thanks to Professor Bay again for giving us this great presentation. And we have recorded today's presentation and we'll post it on our website. So if you missed anything, you can go back to the video and watch it. And well, also many thanks for Professor Fang and Professor Yue's support, especially considering that it's quite late in Hong Kong now. And Professor Yue also presented at our seminar series last month, and also I'm also very grateful for her to be the discussant here today. Thank you all today. So let's just wrap it up here. I hope that we can meet sometimes in the future at some conferences. So I wish everyone a good weekend.